you ever heard of gold? Don't worry, neither have I. But I've heard that it's shiny, and I do like shiny. But anyways, that shit doesn't matter. Why? Well, because true gold is the type that sells like hotcake, and is the one that's made of dust, and you slabber it all over your food. Yes, I'm talking about spices. No, I'm not kidding. In the decade of the 60s of the 15th century, a man named Vasco da Gama was born in the town of Sines in Portugal. And who was this man? Well, he was the son of a knight, and he may have studied in the town of Évora, but frankly that's all we know about the man personally, or at least that I was able to find out. We do have records on his family, which the funniest aspect is that during his generation there were two more idiots named Vasco da Gama in his family. Vasco da Gama, the important one, not those icky liberal ones, did go on to serve in the Order of Santiago, like his father, and seems to have been an effective knight while in it. Vasco da Gama grew up in a fascinating time for Portugal. A time where, as a nation, us poor Moorish bastards began to look outside for sources of wealth and away across Africa and into India. However, it was something that only really began under the rule of King John II, the perfect prince. You see, this fascinating time was for us a time where we were broke out of our ass. Because, as it turns out, if you gather one of the largest fleet of ships and the largest armies a tiny country can yield and then throw it into Morocco, that actually costs money. It's like that time the Portuguese bank told me they were not going to give me a loan for 5,000 rifles, so I could demand the Moroccan king tell me where his ancestor buried King Sebastian. Those bitches. But yes, Portugal's endless campaign served to leave the country bankrupt, and while the previous king saw little profit from the exploration of the Atlantic, our perfect prince would see much more of it. No, not that one. There we go, that's the one. And it was under King John II that the now infamous Treaty of Tordesilhas was signed. And after Bartholomew Diaz and several spies found the source of the lucrative spice trade, Vasco da Gama was chosen to lead the expedition to the Indian subcontinent, the source of the spice trade moving into Europe. And he himself was supported by some of the best navigators the country had, and a total crew of around 170 men. No more funny business. And so, on the 8th of July 1497, Vasco da Gama started his dangerous journey with 4 ships. We can assume that the beginning of his trip was an eventful, as the route his fleet took was one that had already been marked and explored by many other Portuguese sailors. However, when the fleet reached modern-day Sierra Leone, most likely not marked at all here, the expedition abandoned the coast and sailed into open seas, giving sort of a wide berth along the southern Atlantic. This maneuver was sure to be a risky one, but it was one that paid off immensely, making Vasco da Gama the man who made the longest trip in open seas in human history at that time. It was about 10,000 kilometers of open sea that were crossed, or 6,000 miles for you gross Americans. Regardless, by the 16th of December, the fleet had crossed the Atlantic and made landfall at a land which they gave the name Natal. A name that close enough, who cares? A name which directly translates to Christmas. Natal is a name that still holds to this day. The journey beyond that was far less kind to the expedition. The Indian Ocean had far more storms and intense weather than the Atlantic ever had, and the crew were struck multiple times by these storms. Apparently, Vasco da Gama even had to put down a revolt from the crew around this time. However, by mid-March, the expedition had arrived onto the island of Mozambique, a bit further up north. Drawing maps never works. Yes, the island of Mozambique, land off the coast of present-day Mozambique. A name which definitely has never confused anyone before. However, here, Vasco da Gama met Portugal's old frenemies, the Arab Muslims. However, Vasco da Gama did a big brain thing. He pretended to be one of them. Now, to be clear, he just acted like a Muslim, and I don't doubt he knew some things about that religion, but I just find it really funny to think that Vasco da Gama, while pretending to be a Muslim, walked up to the Sultan and immediately asked him to love Jesus. Again, he didn't do that, but it's a funny thought. And you guessed it, the local Muslim population started to suspect Vasco da Gama. I can't imagine why. Medieval Europeans were super cool with religion. But eventually, the local population turned on Vasco and the crew, and they were forced to flee the city, bombing it and its inhabitants in retaliation. But what happened in this place? Why exactly were the Portuguese expelled from the city? And who were the people who lived in Mozambique before the Portuguese took over? Well, the people here understood Arabic. They wore colorful linen and cotton clothes, and a lot of them were merchants. In fact, the entire region was apparently extremely wealthy, with reports of precious stones, jewels, and yes, spices. But in this place, Vasco da Gama was also looking for Christians, as Portugal was still searching for the mythical kingdom of Prester John, a supposedly Catholic kingdom surrounded by Muslim ones. Of course, the Sultan had become aware that the new arrivals were lying and were not in fact Muslim, but regardless, the expedition was forced to flee from the island, arriving soon after at modern-day Kenya. Again, probably not here, but who gives a shit? In Kenya, the crew wound up resorting to piracy and attacked multiple unarmed Muslim merchant vessels. They even visited the nearby city of Mombasa, which obviously they were greeted with hostility. Couldn't have been the piracy, no. It was Jesus. The expedition then went on to the city of Malindi, further north, where they were greeted much more warmly. Also, because that city was in an open conflict with Mombasa at the time. I'm probably butchering all of these names, holy shit. And in that city, they hired a guide who finally led them to India. And on the 20th of May, 1498, Vasco da Gama finally reached India, in the city of Calcutta. The amount of people coming to see us was so tremendous that I had no way of counting. Women holding their children came to see us and followed after us. So, upon hearing the news of a foreign fleet arriving at his capital, the king of Karakut, who was staying in a different city called Ponani, that sounds like a Pokemon, but anyways, and traveled back to the capital in order to find out who the fuck were these people. As Vasco da Gama arrived at the city, he brought on board 2 Indian fishermen and he bought some food from them. Soon after, more Indians arrived at the fleet by boat, asking them who they were and why they were there. I haven't been able to find many sources on what the Indians, Africans, or Arabs thought of the Portuguese expedition into India. The Ottomans specifically would engage in conflicts with the Portuguese in the next century, who by then had seized control over the Indian Ocean. But I can only imagine that at the sight of an armed expedition that had spent over a year traveling the world, the local population probably was not thrilled. Least of all the merchants from Arabia, who realized quite quickly that these were Christian men from Europe. Competition. Vasco da Gama sent a man called João Nunes, a newly Christian man who was a criminal as well, to shore to speak to the locals, as he had a rudimentary grasp on Arabic. And while he was in the city, he met with 2 Tunisian merchants who received him quite kindly. They said something along the lines of, "The fuck are you doing here?" To which he answered, "We came for Christians and spices." This according to some reports. Vasco da Gama may have also thought the Indians were Catholic? I don't know, it was apparently because they had the images of their Hindu gods up, all the while Muslims never had any of that. So, classic colonial European being able to think outside the box. For the next 3 months, the expedition would remain at the city, trying to find an agreement for trade with the king. However, negotiations with the local lord and the king were tough, as the gifts they had brought failed to impress both of them. It was to the point that the local Muslim merchants even suggested that Vasco da Gama and his fleet were not actually emissaries from a foreign court, but were instead regular old pirates. A lot of these disagreements were, yes, due to the low value and quality of the expedition's merchandise, just like the low quality of the microphone that I'm using, and obviously severe cultural differences between the Portuguese and the Indians. Also because us Europeans at that time were not known to be friendly to anyone who thought mayonnaise was not bland. But thankfully, as a continent, we have finally moved past that and now welcome everyone, no matter the color of their skin. But yes, in India, Vasco da Gama apparently thought the Indians were Catholic, and also didn't understand why the trade was in the hands of Muslim traders. Furthermore, when he gave the rather low value gifts to the king, he was publicly humiliated in front of the entire court. Eventually, an agreement was reached. Vasco da Gama bought what little amount of Indian goods he could afford by selling some of his own goods at a very low price, and eventually Vasco da Gama may have left the city without warning, as the king demanded that Vasco da Gama leave behind his entire merchandise. This part of the story is a bit of a mess. Some reports indicate that the king demanded his entire merchandise, while some other sources state that the king demanded that Vasco da Gama pay customs duty as was demanded by every other trader. And in response to that, Vasco da Gama kidnapped around 20 local Indians and fishermen. But regardless, we know that on the 29th of August 1498, Vasco da Gama's fleet left Calicut and returned to Portugal about 1 year later. Half the crew died throughout the entire trip, and half the fleet was lost. And more than that, Vasco da Gama even failed to secure trade agreements in India, but the spices brought back and the jewelry was enough to convince the now King Manuel I to further pursue this avenue. In the coming decades, the spice trade would become the most important source of revenue for the Portuguese crown. This event marked the beginning of globalism as an idea, and in many ways, the actions of the expedition and future Portuguese trips would serve as a foundation for other imperialistic policies, such as gunboat diplomacy. Vasco da Gama was received at home as a hero, and the king bestowed upon him the fief of Sines, his own place of birth, as a town for him to rule over, and a generous royal pension to boot. But this expedition was not the only one. It was a catalyst. It was what led to several more expeditions and the establishment of the Portuguese state of India, a state carved together by many Portuguese people, most famous among them, the Caesar of the East.